All right, Camilla, thanks so much for being on this podcast with me. My first question that I have for you is tell the audience, just a little bit about yourself and how you started in the mental health community.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for inviting me onto your podcast. It's an honor to speak with you today. So, to answer your question, try not to make it too long. I started in the helping field in 2013, working for a nonprofit with the chronically unhoused adult population. And this work was really, really meaningful. I met some incredibly creative and brilliant minds. And also, these people had really difficult lives and extensive trauma histories, and were not often met with compassion and humanity by greater society. And when I was in this role, I really started to learn about systems and how the macro systems impact people on a micro level. And after several years, I decided to transition to work with youth. And while I was working with youth in the system, my stepfather, Charlie, died. And this was in
Um,
June 2018. And after he died, my whole world sort of shattered, was really disoriented. And, we live in a very death avoidant culture. And this was the first time I really confronted my own mortality. And while I was doing that, my whole perspective changed. I mean, I really understood that my time here is limited. And like, how do I want to spend my time in a meaningful way? And so as I was sort of sitting with those questions and reflecting on it, I decided to get back into the community mental health field and integrate my passion for mind body wellness. I'm also a yoga teacher and have some training in yoga therapy, and I'm a certified personal trainer. And I just love understanding and working with the mind body. So I started teaching people who have a SMI designation, which means serious mental illness, and also general mental health conditions, how to sort of create and implement these self-care practices through yoga, through breath work, through learning how to nourish their mind and body with nutrition. Um, and, I think these self-care practices are sort of foundational and everybody knows about them, but they don't prioritize them. And so as a grieving person, I also benefit from doing this with clients and sharing these practices with them and doing it together. But during this time, I also decided to go back to school and I got my master's in social work. I graduated last year. And after graduating, I found Center for Compassion. And so Center for Compassion is a grief and bereavement clinic in Chandler, Arizona, and they specialize in grief and bereavement. Um, and so right now I currently work part-time as a grief counselor and then also in the community mental health field, but I'm starting to transition into full-time grief counseling over the summer because this work, like creating safe spaces for people, for especially grieving people to go and to be cared for, feels like the most meaningful thing for me to do moving forward. It's a
mm-hmm,
very long-winded answer, but I feel like all of those parts were so important in my journey to kind of get where I am today.
mm-hmm. So if I could ask, like, because oftentimes when it comes to grief, there are certain stages of grief. Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm wondering, what that process, what are some of the stages that's involved?
So the stages of grief was developed by Kubler-Ross for people who are dying, not for a bereaved person who's lost a loved one.
Mm,
So that research is really focusing on, yeah, people who are dying and moving through that process. So for the bereaved population, someone who's still living and who's experienced a loss of a loved one, the death of a loved one, there really is no right way to grieve. There are no concrete stages. I think the way I hear people describe it most is it's like waves in the ocean, and you never know when you're going to get hit with a wave. And sometimes it feels like you're drowning in grief, and sometimes you can sort of bring your head up and surf the wave a little bit, but there's no right way to grieve.
mm. So, like, what do you do in your practice, in your current role, I should say?
As a grief counselor,
Yeah.
I meet people where they are at. Everybody's different. So I work with the traumatically bereaved, which means that they've experienced a traumatic death, which is sort of a sudden, unexpected, out of order loss that they've experienced, very different from, someone who's older and sort of is expected to die soon. It's a different experience. And so I work with that population a lot. And I really focus on presence and mindfulness and getting curious about what's happening for someone in their mind and their body and their heart, and sort of bringing in this human element of like, take my expert hat off and let's just be here together, human to human, and move through the hard things. That's
Mm-hmm.
really my focus. And then bringing in compassion, like how can we be a little kinder to our tender hearts and to each other and ourselves?
Mm-hmm. So people that who are going through bereavement, how do you as a grief counselor sort of help, you know, help them sort of with with their struggles?
Everybody's different. Some people come in and they just want a safe place to talk and to be heard and seen. Um, Other people enjoy more artistic sort of forms of expression, whether that's through writing or bringing elements of like music or other forms of art. Some people process more somatically, so learning kind of their own experience in their body and bringing language to that. It's really person-centered and really individualized, which means everybody's grief journey is very different. And so part of this process is sort of just getting curious about someone's experience. And then as you get curious, they sort of share what's true for them, and then you explore that. And then typically they feel empowered to sort of reclaim their grief in a way that's meaningful for them.
Mm-hmm. What have you heard in like some of the sessions that you've had with clients, who are going through stages of bereavement, what are some of the common themes that you sort of notice?
Say more about what you mean by that.
Like if someone is going through like you said, a sudden loss or a sudden thing happened to them in their lives, what's they come in and they sort of tell you a story about that, what are some of the common themes that you see with clients?
I think this sense of disorientation, meaning that, yeah, their worldview has shattered. When someone they really love dies, everything changes. It impacts every aspect of their life in many ways. And I noticed that with some people, and especially bereaved parents, they no longer want often to do the same type of work that they were doing before. Like it's just too exhausting when you're grieving and expected to go back to work right away and function in a culture where maybe what you value no longer aligns with what you valued before. Um, I think I see that often. Like people's perspective really changes, and who they spend time with and what they do in their time changes. Everything changes, and sort of it's a lot of transitions all at once, which again is part of sort of this overwhelming experience of grief, that everything changes.
Yeah, and oftentimes, oftentimes with that grief, it comes people have purpose for like how they want to move forward. I was recently talking to someone the other day, and she talked about how she lost her daughter in a school shooting, and so how she used that loss to sort of advocate for better gun reform, police reform.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially as a bereaved parent, I imagine there's a lot of, depending on how the child died, anger. And in grief counseling, we don't necessarily push for that to find meaning. I think we need to move through the process of learning how to be with our grief because it never goes away, but we can learn how to relate to it. But when we can sort of find a relationship that feels okay to Well, let me step back before I even say that. I think what I want to say is my two of my mentors are bereaved parents, and they would say, and they've created just amazing resources for the world that are helping so many people. And they would say, I would give all of that back, everything I've created to have my beloved child or whoever it is back. Like I would give it all back if I could have my child, right? So it's sort of this both and. It's awful that a child dies and there's a broken heart, and also people do create really meaningful experiences out of that. And that should never be forced, but you're right, it does happen.
Mm-hmm. So my next question is like, what sorts of techniques or like modalities do you use to help bereaving parents, going through like an unexpected loss or yeah.
Mhm. I'm still exploring this because I'm, fairly new in this field within the last year. And what's been most helpful for me is my relationship with the client or the parent, and really getting curious about who they are and how they express. And once I can sort of build that relationship and understand how they express, then we can sort of move into modalities because it's not like a manualized treatment where we do step, 1 through 5. It really is
Mm-hmm.
a relationship and it requires building trust and safety. So like one of my clients is an amazing storyteller, and that's how the client chooses to process grief is through storytelling. Another one is really funny and uses humor as a way to sort of connect. And mostly, I think people come into grief counseling to process grief, but also to remember their loved ones and have other people
Mm-hmm.
remember them with them, and talk about them and share memories. And sometimes people bring in pictures. And Center for Compassion has really beautiful communal areas for memorialization. So we really encourage that for people to talk about their loved ones and share about them, and so we can remember with them.
Mm-hmm. And I always ask guests this, but like, what's one thing that you've learned as a grief counselor in doing this work?
Oh, I feel like I'm learning something every day. Um, I think the more I lean into mortality and talk about death, the more gratitude I have for life. Like life is really delicate and it goes by fast. And for those of us who are lucky to have a long life, um, yeah, it's just really special. And I don't take that for granted. And I think this work helps me also discern what's meaningful and how I want to serve and connect with people.
Mm-hmm. And and to that end, what's one thing that you want to learn as a grief counselor in terms of something new? Yeah, that kind of thing.
I'm a lifelong learner, so I will probably take more and more trainings. I recently did one with Dr. Cacciatore. She is a professor at ASU, and she's also a researcher, and she researches grief and bereavement specifically. And she's got this amazing care farm in Cornville, Arizona, where she's got rescued animals. I think there's like more than 52, um, and she cares for them, and other grieving people come to the farm and um, also spend time with the animals. And it's like this beautiful space where grief is kind of held as this sacred experience, and people get to remember their loved ones and have support doing that. So I think continuing to go to that care farm and do trainings and maybe volunteer there, I think that's how I want to continue to learn at this point.
Yeah, you bring up a good point because oftentimes animals that when especially, I remember like during the pandemic there were dogs, people had these do grieve dogs or I don't know what they're called, but they were usually there for people that were struggling emotionally and with whatever they were going through.
Yeah. Yeah. Animals are such special companions. And, Dr. Cacciatore in her research, she shared that she asked a bunch of grieving um, individuals what has been the most supportive service. And therapy was up there, and group therapy was there too, like group support, but animals actually came first. And I suspect that is because they don't talk and they don't judge. They're just present and sort of allow and accept whatever comes up for you to be, and still provides like so much love and care in their own way, right?
Hmm. Lastly, to wrap this up, like what can other mental health professionals entering, the mental health field, what can they sort of look, what steps do they need to take to sort of, become a grief counselor, but also like learn from people that are going through bereavement, just like a tools for the trade for like how to prepare to for this kind of work.
Sure, yeah. I think education is really important. So, to become grief informed, which really is its own specialty, our founder, Terry, at Center for Compassion, has started providing education. So people can go to the centerforcompassion.com to look up those resources. And then same thing, Dr. Cacciatore um, has a website called the Miss Foundation, and she's got many trainings for people in the community to go to learn uh, about grief counseling. And something they both say is death is not a probability, it's a certainty. And so really this work is for everyone. Like, let's talk more about it because we're all going to experience it someday. And how can we support each other in a compassionate way?
Hmm. All right.